Anna's day began like any other. The sun filtered through the lace curtains of her modest Riverton home as she prepared for a quick trip to the local farmer's market. The air was crisp, and the town was just beginning to stir to life. She hummed a tune as she packed her tote bag with essentials, unaware that this ordinary day was about to take an extraordinary turn. She waved goodbye to her neighbors and set off in her little sedan, the familiar hum of the engine soothing her nerves. It had been a stressful week. Her husband, Tom, had been working long hours as the police captain, dealing with mounting pressure from both his team and the town. Tom was respected, but his position meant he was constantly juggling the fine line between being a leader and a target. Anna admired his resilience but often wished he had more time for himself, and for her. As she drove down the winding road leading to the market, Anna noticed a police checkpoint up ahead. She slowed down, her hands instinctively tightening on the steering wheel. Checkpoints weren't unusual in Riverton, but something about the officer's demeanor made her stomach tighten. They stood stiffly, their expressions cold and detached, their eyes scanning each vehicle with an unsettling intensity. She rolled down her window as one of the officers signaled her to stop. "License and registration," barked Officer Grant, a stocky man with a permanent scowl etched across his face. His partner, Officer Lewis, stood a few feet back, leaning against their patrol car with an air of disinterest. Anna complied, handing over her documents with a polite smile. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flicker of unease gnawing at her. Grant glanced at her license and then at her, his eyes narrowing. "You were driving a little too fast back there," he said, though Anna knew she had been well within the speed limit. She opened her mouth to protest but decided against it. Arguing with a police officer, especially one who seemed to be itching for a confrontation, wouldn't end well. "I see," she said instead. "I apologize if I was mistaken. It won't happen again." But her attempt at de-escalation seemed to do the opposite. Grant smirked, handing her license to Lewis, who ambled over to join them. "Step out of the vehicle," Grant ordered, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "What? Why?" Anna's heart raced. She had done nothing wrong, and this was quickly spiraling into something far more serious than a routine traffic stop. "Did I stutter?" Grant snapped. "Out. Now." Anna hesitated, her mind racing with possible outcomes. Was this about intimidation? Were they looking for a bribe? The town had murmurs of corruption within the police force, but she had never expected to experience it firsthand. Still, she couldn't ignore the implicit threat in Grant's voice. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, her palms clammy despite the cool morning air. The next few minutes were a blur of humiliation and frustration. Grant insisted on searching her car, claiming it was a random check. Lewis hovered nearby, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of boredom and quiet menace. When Anna questioned their actions, Grant leaned in close, his breath hot and unpleasant as he sneered, "You're awfully chatty for someone who could be hiding something." "I have nothing to hide," Anna shot back, her voice firm despite the lump forming in her throat. "This is harassment, and you know it." Her words seemed to strike a nerve. Grant's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of anger. "Harassment? Lady, you have no idea who you're talking to." He gestured to Lewis. "Check her bag." "Don't you dare," Anna started, but Lewis was already rifling through her belongings, tossing them carelessly onto the hood of her car. Her tote bag, neatly packed with groceries and a small notebook she used for recipes, was now a mess of scattered items. A wave of indignation surged through her. "This is outrageous. I'm calling my husband," she declared, reaching for her phone. Grant chuckled darkly. "Go ahead. Let's see what your husband can do about this." Anna dialed Tom, her fingers trembling as she pressed the phone to her ear. It rang twice before he answered, his voice calm but tinged with concern. "Anna? Is everything okay?" No, she said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to stay composed. I'm at a checkpoint near the old mill road. These officers are. She stopped abruptly as Grant snatched the phone from her hand, ending the call with a click. That's enough of that, he said, pocketing the phone with a smug grin. We'll decide when you can leave. Anna stared at him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. They didn't know who her husband was. They didn't know that the man they were effectively taunting was the very person who could end their careers with a single phone call. But in this moment, she was just another woman standing alone against two men drunk on power. Tom, however, was far from oblivious. The abrupt end of Anna's call set off alarm bells, and he wasted no time in grabbing his keys and heading for the door. As he drove toward the checkpoint, his mind raced with questions. What had happened? Why had the call been cut off? And who were the officers daring to mistreat his wife? Back at the checkpoint, Grant and Lewis continued their charade, seemingly enjoying the distress they were causing. But their satisfaction was short-lived. The faint sound of an approaching car grew louder, and Anna's heart lifted as she recognized the familiar silhouette of Tom's vehicle. Relief mingled with anticipation as she realized the tables were about to turn. Tom stepped out of his car, his presence commanding even before he spoke. His uniform, though not worn that day, seemed to emanate authority. He approached the scene with a deliberate calmness that made the officers shift uncomfortably. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice even but laced with a quiet menace. Grant's confidence faltered as he took in the man standing before him. Who the hell are you? He demanded, though his bravado was clearly wavering. Tom's eyes narrowed, and his tone turned icy. I'm Captain Tom Rivers. And you've just made the biggest mistake of your career. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time that day, Anna felt the scales tipping in her favor. The nightmare wasn't over, but she knew that justice was about to be served. The air at the checkpoint grew heavy with tension as Tom's words sank in. Grant and Lewis exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado draining away. Tom stepped closer, his eyes scanning the scene with an intensity that left no doubt about his authority. Anna stood by her car, a mix of relief and anger simmering just beneath the surface. Her husband's presence was a lifeline, but the indignity she had suffered still burned in her chest. Captain Rivers, Grant said finally, his voice tinged with forced respect. We were just conducting a routine stop. Your wife was. Don't, Tom interrupted sharply, holding up a hand. His voice was calm, but the steel behind it was unmistakable. I've already heard enough. Routine stops don't involve humiliating innocent civilians, let alone confiscating their phones. You're going to explain exactly what happened here, and you're going to do it now. Lewis, who had been leaning against the patrol car moments ago with a smug grin, now stood rigid, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Sir, it was just procedure, he mumbled. Nothing personal. Tom turned to Anna, his expression softening for a moment. Are you okay? He asked, his voice quieter but no less resolute. Anna nodded, though her trembling hands betrayed the lingering effects of the ordeal. They threw my things on the hood, she said, gesturing to the mess of groceries and her scattered belongings. They searched me without cause, and when I called you, they took my phone. Tom's jaw tightened. He turned back to Grant and Lewis, his calm exterior barely containing the storm brewing beneath. You call that procedure? Intimidating a woman, searching her car without a warrant, and seizing her property? You're not enforcing the law, you're abusing it. Grant's face flushed, but he held his ground. Look, Captain, we didn't know she was your wife. If we had. Tom's glare silenced him. That's your defense? You didn't know she was my wife? So it's acceptable to treat anyone else this way? What you've done here isn't just unethical, it's illegal. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier arrogance now replaced with a nervous energy. Tom took a deep breath, his gaze piercing. "Give her phone back. Now." Grant hesitated but eventually reached into his pocket and handed Anna's phone back to her. She took it with trembling hands, her gratitude tempered by the anger that still lingered. Tom didn't take his eyes off the officers. "You've both crossed a line today," he said, his voice low but filled with a quiet fury. "And I intend to make sure you're held accountable." Lewis, who had been silent for most of the exchange, finally spoke up. "Captain Rivers, can't we just let this go? We didn't mean any harm. It got a little out of hand, sure, but it wasn't intentional." Tom's gaze hardened. "Let this go? Tell me, Officer Lewis, how many other routine stops have gotten a little out of hand? How many other people have you humiliated or intimidated because you thought no one would challenge you?" Lewis looked down at his boots, unable to answer. The sound of an approaching car broke the tense silence. A sleek black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows gleaming under the morning sun. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Chief Harris, the head of the Riverton Police Department and Tom's direct superior. Harris was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense demeanor. His arrival added a new layer of gravity to the situation. "Captain Rivers," Harris said, striding over. "I got a call from dispatch about an issue here. What's going on?" Tom turned to face his superior, his expression grim. "Chief, I just witnessed 2 of our officers abusing their authority at this checkpoint. They've harassed and humiliated my wife, searched her car without cause, and confiscated her phone. This isn't an isolated incident, it's a symptom of a deeper problem." Harris's eyes narrowed as he looked from Tom to Grant and Lewis. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice sharp. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but Tom cut him off. "Don't bother lying. There's no excuse for what they've done." Harris sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've been hearing whispers about misconduct in this department," he admitted. "But this? This is beyond unacceptable." Anna, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke up. "Chief Harris, I don't know how many other people they've done this to, but I know one thing, if Tom hadn't shown up, they would have gotten away with it. How many others didn't have someone to call?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Harris's face tightened. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Rivers," he said. "This stops now." Turning to Grant and Lewis, Harris's tone turned icy. "Hand over your badges and weapons. Effective immediately, you're both suspended pending a full investigation." Grant's face went pale, and Lewis looked as though he might protest, but Harris raised a hand. "Don't. You've embarrassed this department, and you've betrayed the trust of this community. If I find evidence of more misconduct, you won't just lose your jobs, you'll face criminal charges." The 2 officers reluctantly handed over their badges and guns, their expressions a mix of anger and defeat. Harris turned back to Tom and Anna. "I'm sorry this happened," he said sincerely. "I'll personally oversee the investigation, and I'll make sure justice is served." Tom nodded, though his face remained hard. "Thank you, Chief. But this isn't just about my wife. This is about restoring trust in the department. People need to know that we're here to protect them, not exploit them." Harris's gaze softened. "You're right, Tom. And we'll make sure they do." As the officers were escorted away, Anna let out a shaky breath. The ordeal was over, but the fight for justice had just begun. Tom put a reassuring arm around her shoulder, and together they walked back to their car, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, tension, and resolve. The fallout from the incident at the checkpoint rippled through Riverton like a stone dropped into a still pond, disturbing the fragile balance between trust and authority. For Anna, the memory of that morning remained vivid, a constant reminder of how easily power could be abused. For Tom, It became a call to action, a challenge to confront the deeper rot within the very institution he had devoted his life to. At home, the couple found themselves at the center of a storm. Anna fielded calls from concerned friends and neighbors, many of whom were shocked to learn of her ordeal. "If it could happen to you," one friend said, her voice trembling, "then what chance do the rest of us have?" The sentiment echoed in nearly every conversation, fueling Anna's determination to ensure the incident wouldn't fade quietly into the past. Tom, meanwhile, threw himself into his work with renewed purpose. As the police captain, he had long been aware of the whispers about misconduct within the department, but they had always been just that, whispers. Now, the problem was impossible to ignore. The abuse Anna had endured wasn't just a personal affront, it was a symptom of a systemic issue that demanded immediate attention. Chief Harris had kept his word, launching an internal investigation into the actions of Grant and Lewis. But Tom knew that the problem went beyond two rogue officers. Over the years, complacency and unchecked authority had allowed a culture of intimidation to take root in pockets of the department. Changing that culture would require more than suspensions and apologies. It would require a complete overhaul of how the department operated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast the living room in a warm, golden glow, Tom and Anna sat together on the couch. The weight of the past few days hung heavily in the air. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't shown up," Anna said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on the fabric of her skirt. "How far would they have gone? And how many others have they done this to?" Tom reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "I don't even want to imagine," he admitted. "But you're right. This isn't just about us. It's about the people who don't have someone to call, who don't have anyone to stand up for them. That's why we have to fight this, Anna. We have to make sure this never happens again." Anna nodded, her resolve hardening. "So what do we do? How do we make them listen?" Tom leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "We start by telling the truth. People need to know what happened, not just to you, but to anyone who's been mistreated. And we need to give them a voice, a platform to share their stories." The idea took root quickly. Over the next few days, Anna and Tom began reaching out to the community, organizing a town hall meeting to address the issue of police misconduct. The response was overwhelming. Word spread quickly, fueled by social media and word of mouth, and soon the small community center where the meeting was to be held was filled to capacity. On the night of the town hall, the atmosphere was electric. Rows of folding chairs stretched from wall to wall, and every seat was occupied. Dozens more people stood along the back and sides of the room, their faces a mix of curiosity, anger, and determination. Anna sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Tom stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for being here," Tom began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What happened to my wife was not an isolated incident. It was the result of a broken system, a system that we, as a community, have the power to change." He spoke candidly about the incident at the checkpoint, describing in detail the humiliation Anna had endured. He didn't shy away from acknowledging his own role in the department's shortcomings, admitting that complacency had allowed bad behavior to go unchecked for too long. His honesty struck a chord with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement or murmured their support. As Tom finished speaking, he opened the floor to others who wanted to share their experiences. One by one, people stood up to tell their stories, stories of unjust arrests, excessive force, and intimidation at the hands of those sworn to protect them. Each account added weight to the growing call for change, painting a picture of a community that had suffered in silence for far too long. Anna listened intently, her heart aching for the pain and fear that filled the room. But she also felt a spark of hope. For the first time, people were coming together, united by a shared determination to make things right. The meeting stretched late into the night, and by the end, the group had drafted a list of demands for the department. They called for increased transparency, mandatory body cameras for all officers, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to investigate complaints of misconduct. It was an ambitious plan, but one that felt achievable with the support of the community. In the days that followed, the momentum continued to build. Local media picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the town's efforts to hold its police department accountable. Grant and Lewis faced formal charges of misconduct, and their actions became a rallying cry for reform. The community's demands were presented to the town council, and though there was resistance from some quarters, the overwhelming public support made it clear that change was inevitable. For Anna, the journey was both exhausting and empowering. She had never seen herself as an activist, but the experience had awakened a fierce determination to stand up for what was right. She and Tom became a formidable team, their bond strengthened by their shared mission. But the fight was far from over. As the initial wave of attention began to fade, Anna and Tom knew they would need to remain vigilant to ensure that the changes they had fought for were implemented and upheld. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Riverton would never be the same. And neither would they. The pressure on the Riverton Police Department mounted in the weeks that followed, as the weight of community demands pressed firmly against the entrenched systems of power. The investigation into Grant and Lewis unraveled more than just their actions at the checkpoint. It exposed a pattern of unchecked misconduct spanning years. Internal memos, citizen complaints, and witness testimonies painted a picture of a department where a culture of impunity had taken root. For Tom, this revelation was both validating and deeply troubling. As a police captain, he had prided himself on being a leader who upheld the highest standards of integrity. Yet, now, he had to reckon with the uncomfortable reality that he had overlooked the cracks in the system, cracks that had widened into chasms over time. He threw himself into the work of reform with a singular focus, even as it began to strain his relationships with colleagues and old friends within the department. Meanwhile, Anna found herself at the center of a growing movement. The town hall meeting had ignited something within the community, and people began to rally around her as a symbol of resilience and justice. She was interviewed by local and regional news outlets, her story resonating far beyond Riverton. But Anna refused to let herself be turned into a figurehead without substance. She insisted on highlighting the voices of others who had suffered at the hands of the system, making it clear that this wasn't just her fight, it was everyone's. One afternoon, Anna sat in a small cafe downtown, meeting with Grace Carter, a young woman whose brother had been wrongfully arrested by Grant and Lewis 2 years earlier. Grace's hands shook as she recounted how the officers had fabricated charges to justify their actions, leaving her family financially and emotionally devastated. Anna listened intently, her heart aching with anger and compassion. When Grace finished, Anna reached across the table and took her hand. "Grace," Anna said firmly, "you have to tell this story. People need to hear it, and they need to see that they're not alone." Grace hesitated, her eyes brimming with tears. "But what if no one believes me? What if it just makes things worse?" "They'll believe you," Anna assured her. "And if they don't, we'll make them. You're stronger than you think." Grace eventually agreed, and her testimony became a turning point. It was featured prominently in a local investigative report that delved into the broader patterns of abuse within the department. The report sparked outrage, and protests began to swell in Riverton. People of all ages and backgrounds took to the streets, holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "End police corruption." The demonstrations were peaceful but resolute, their energy a mix of righteous anger and unyielding hope. Tom watched the protests from the window of his office, feeling a mixture of pride and unease. He supported the cause wholeheartedly, but he knew the resistance they faced was formidable. Not everyone within the department, or the community, was eager to embrace change. He had already received thinly veiled threats and anonymous messages urging him to back off. Some of his fellow officers viewed him as a traitor, accusing him of betraying his own. One night, as Tom drove home from a late meeting, his car was forced to a stop on a quiet, dimly lit street. Two men emerged from a dark SUV, their faces obscured by baseball caps. Tom's instincts kicked in immediately, and his hand moved toward his concealed weapon. But before he could act, one of the men raised his hands in a placating gesture. "We're just here to talk," the man said, his voice low and rough. "No need for things to get messy." Tom's grip on the weapon tightened, his eyes scanning for potential threats. "You've got about 10 seconds to explain what you want." "We're not fans of what you're doing," the second man said. "Stirring up trouble, making life harder for the rest of us. Maybe it's time you think about the consequences, for yourself and your family." The threat was clear, but Tom refused to flinch. "Is that supposed to scare me? Because all it's doing is convincing me I'm on the right track." The men exchanged a look, then backed away slowly. "Suit yourself," the first man said. "But don't say we didn't warn you." As the SUV sped off, Tom sat in his car, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew the risks of the path he'd chosen, but the encounter only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for Anna or for the community, he was fighting for the very soul of the institution he'd sworn to serve. Back at home, Anna waited anxiously, her worry deepening when Tom walked through the door later than expected. When he recounted the encounter, her face paled, and she gripped his hand tightly. "This is getting dangerous, Tom," she said, her voice trembling. "What if they come after you? Or us?" The lawsuit against the Riverton Police Department unfolded like a slow-burning storm, growing in intensity as it gained momentum. Evelyn Cole, with her sharp wit and unshakable resolve, spearheaded the legal battle, turning the courtroom into a battleground for accountability. Anna found herself thrust into the spotlight as one of the key plaintiffs, her testimony serving as a lightning rod for both support and opposition. Despite the nerves that twisted in her stomach, she stood firm, determined to see justice served. Tom watched from the sidelines, his role as a captain and Anna's husband placing him in a precarious position. He couldn't publicly involve himself in the case without jeopardizing his standing within the department, but behind closed doors, he was Anna's staunchest ally. Their evenings were spent poring over documents and strategizing with Evelyn, the lines between their personal lives and the fight for justice blurring until they were indistinguishable. As the trial progressed, shocking revelations came to light. Whistleblowers from within the department provided damning evidence of a long-standing pattern of misconduct, including falsified reports, planted evidence, and coercive tactics used to silence victims. These revelations painted a grim picture of a system that had prioritized self-preservation over justice for far too long. The community of Riverton, once divided on the issue of police reform, began to rally behind Anna and the other plaintiffs. Town hall meetings swelled with attendance, and protests grew larger and more organized. People of all backgrounds came together, united by a shared demand for change. Even those who had initially been skeptical of the movement began to see the depth of the problem and the necessity of addressing it. But not everyone welcomed the change. A vocal minority, including some within the department, pushed back hard against the reform efforts. Anonymous threats became a regular occurrence for Anna and Tom, each one a chilling reminder of the risks they faced. One night, their mailbox was smashed, and a crude note was left behind, warning them to drop the case or face the consequences. It was a stark reminder that their fight for justice came with a heavy price. Tom was livid when he discovered the note. "They're cowards," he fumed, pacing the living room as Anna sat calmly at the kitchen table. "They think they can scare us into backing down." "They don't understand who they're dealing with," Anna replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her edges. "We've come too far to stop now." Tom knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "I just don't want to lose you, Anna. This fight is important, but not more than you are." "You won't lose me," she promised, her resolve unwavering. "But we can't let them win, Tom. If we back down, it's not just us who lose, it's everyone who's been hurt by this system." Tom nodded, his determination rekindled by her strength. They decided. Ed to install security cameras around their home and alert the authorities about the threats. But they refused to let fear dictate their actions. As the trial neared its conclusion, Evelyn delivered a closing argument that left the courtroom silent. "This case isn't just about a few bad officers," she said, her voice echoing with conviction. "It's about a system that allowed those officers to abuse their power without consequence. It's about a community that has been silenced for too long. And it's about the courage of ordinary people like Anna, who refuse to let fear stop them from doing what's right. Today, we have the opportunity to say, no more. No more abuse. No more corruption. No more silence." The jury deliberated for hours, and when the verdict was finally announced, the courtroom erupted in emotion. The jury found the department liable for systemic misconduct and awarded significant damages to the plaintiffs. It was a victory that sent shockwaves through Riverton and beyond, serving as a beacon of hope for other communities grappling with similar issues. But the victory was only the beginning. The settlement funds were used to establish a community oversight board and implement reforms within the department. Officers were required to undergo rigorous training on ethics and de-escalation techniques, and body cameras became mandatory for all on-duty personnel. Grant and Lewis, the officers who had sparked the movement with their actions, were not only dismissed but also faced criminal charges for their misconduct. For Anna and Tom, the outcome was bittersweet. They had won a significant battle, but the scars of the journey remained. Anna had become a reluctant hero, admired by many but also a target for those who resented the change she had helped bring about. Tom faced challenges within the department, where some colleagues viewed him as a traitor. Yet, despite the difficulties, they found solace in knowing they had made a lasting difference. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Anna turned to Tom. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked quietly. Tom took her hand, his gaze steady. "Absolutely. We didn't just fight for ourselves, Anna. We fought for this town, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. And look how far we've come." Anna nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It feels like we've started something bigger than us." "You have," Tom said, squeezing her hand. "And it's only the beginning." In the months that followed, Riverton began to heal. The reforms brought a renewed sense of trust between the police and the community, and people started to believe in the possibility of justice again. Anna and Tom became symbols of resilience and hope, their story a reminder that even in the face of immense challenges, change was possible. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear: Riverton was no longer defined by its past. It was a town transformed, its future shaped by the courage of ordinary people who had dared to stand up for what was right. Months turned into a year, and Riverton began to wear its scars with pride, a testament to its hard-fought transformation. The town's atmosphere, once heavy with mistrust and tension, felt lighter, infused with the cautious optimism of a community learning to believe in itself again. The changes sparked by Anna, Tom, and the lawsuit had rippled far beyond the courtroom, touching every corner of the town in ways they never could have anticipated. Anna, now recognized as a local leader, found herself at the forefront of Riverton's ongoing journey toward justice. She had turned the settlement funds into a community resource center, a place where people could find legal aid, counseling, and a platform to share their experiences. She spent her days meeting with residents, listening to their stories, and advocating for their needs. It was exhausting work, but Anna thrived on the knowledge that she was making a tangible difference. One afternoon, as she stood in the resource center's bustling lobby, a young woman approached her hesitantly. She introduced herself as Leah and explained that she had recently moved to Riverton, drawn by the town's reputation for resilience and change. Leah was nervous but determined as she recounted her own experience with police misconduct in her previous city. Tears welled in her eyes as she thanked Anna for inspiring her to speak out and fight for justice. Anna placed a comforting hand on Leah's shoulder. "You're brave for sharing your story," she said gently. "And you're not alone anymore. We'll stand with you. The exchange reminded Anna why she had chosen this path, despite the challenges. It wasn't just about the past, it was about building a future where stories like Leah's would become relics of a broken system rather than recurring headlines. Meanwhile, Tom faced his own uphill battle within the Riverton Police Department. Despite the sweeping reforms, resistance lingered among a small but vocal faction of officers who resented the changes. They saw Tom as a symbol of betrayal, someone who had sided with outsiders against his own. It was a cold reality, one that tested his resolve daily. Yet, he refused to falter. Tom had taken on a new role as the department's reform liaison, tasked with ensuring that the changes were implemented effectively and transparently. It was a delicate balancing act, requiring him to navigate the treacherous waters of departmental politics while maintaining the trust of the community. He spent hours reviewing new policies, meeting with oversight board members, and mentoring younger officers who showed promise. One evening, Tom was approached by Officer Daniels, a rookie who had joined the force after the lawsuit. Daniels was eager but uncertain, grappling with the weight of his new responsibilities. "Captain Donovan," he began hesitantly, "do you think we can really change things? Or is it just going to go back to the way it was?" Tom looked at the young officer, seeing a reflection of his own doubts from years past. "Change is never easy, Daniels," he said. "And it's never guaranteed. But it's worth fighting for. If you remember why you joined this job, to protect and serve, you'll be part of the solution, not the problem." Daniels nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thanks, Captain. That means a lot." Tom watched him walk away, feeling a spark of hope. If officers like Daniels could carry the torch, perhaps the department's culture could truly evolve. As the months passed, Riverton's transformation began to attract national attention. Journalists, activists, and policymakers visited the town, eager to learn from its journey. Anna was invited to speak at conferences and panels, her voice becoming a powerful force for change on a larger stage. She shared Riverton's story with humility and passion, always emphasizing the collective effort that had made it possible. But with the newfound attention came new challenges. Not everyone was pleased with Riverton's rising profile. Critics accused the town of painting an overly rosy picture of its progress, while others questioned whether the changes would last. Anna and Tom faced relentless scrutiny, their every action dissected by both supporters and detractors. One night, as they sat on their porch, the weight of it all seemed to catch up with them. The cool night air was filled with the sound of crickets, and the stars above provided a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within them. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough?" Anna asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Or if it's all just temporary?" Tom reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. "I think about that all the time," he admitted. "But then I look at what we've already done. The lives we've touched, the people we've inspired. That's not temporary, Anna. That's real." Anna turned to him, her eyes glistening. "I just don't want to fail them. The people who believed in us, who trusted us to make things better." "You haven't failed anyone," Tom said firmly. "And you won't. Because you care too much to let that happen." In the end, it was their unwavering partnership that kept them going. They drew strength from each other, their shared purpose giving them the resilience to face whatever came next. The true measure of Riverton's transformation came during a crisis that tested the community's resolve. A severe storm swept through the region, causing widespread damage and displacing dozens of families. The police department, under Tom's leadership, worked alongside community members to provide aid and support. Officers and civilians alike volunteered to clear debris, distribute supplies, and offer shelter to those in need. Anna spearheaded the resource center's relief efforts, coordinating with local organizations to ensure that no one was left behind. The storm had leveled the playing field, reminding everyone of their shared humanity. For a brief moment, the divisions that had plagued the town seemed to fade, replaced by a spirit of unity and compassion. As Riverton rebuilt, it became clear that the town's greatest strength lay in its ability to come together in the face of adversity. The storm had tested more than just infrastructure, it had tested the values that Anna and Tom had fought so hard to instill. And Riverton had passed with flying colors. In the years that followed, Riverton became a symbol of hope and resilience, a beacon for other communities seeking to chart a new course. Anna and Tom continued their work, knowing that the fight for justice was never truly over. They had learned that change was not a destination but a journey, one that required constant vigilance and effort. And as they walked hand in hand through the town they had helped transform, they felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for what they had accomplished, but for the people who had made it possible. Riverton was more than a town, it was a testament to the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change.